It came to represent a movement. 50 years on, Rita Braver is talking with some of the women behind Ms. Magazine.
I had an abortion when I was in London, and why has this common experience not been spoken about?
Gloria Steinem spent her life telling women to speak up, but she stayed quiet about her own dark experiences for decades. In the 1960s, powerful men in journalism made her awful offers. One pinned her down and tried to force himself on her. She had to bite him to escape. Others promised her jobs in exchange for private meetings. She never named them, but some were later exposed as predators. At 91, she finally admits why she stayed silent all those years. The truth about what she endured will shock you. Gloria Steinem was born on March 25, 1934, in Toledo, Ohio. She didn't come into the world in a quiet hospital, but inside a tiny trailer hitched to her father's Dodge. Her dad made a living selling antiques, always on the move, and her childhood was just as unstable. Only weeks after her birth, her mother Ruth, once a respected newspaper reporter, had a terrible mental breakdown. She started seeing things and hearing voices, believing the radio was talking directly to her. By the time Gloria was 10, she had gone to 12 different schools. Her father never stayed anywhere long, and she lived out of a car most of the time, doing homework between long road trips and flea markets. In January 1944, when Gloria was just 9 years old, her father finally left them. It was the middle of a snowstorm near Battle Creek, Michigan. He took off with $500 from a poker game and never looked back. Gloria and her mother were left to survive in a freezing cold house back in Toledo. The furnace didn't work, and the city had already marked it unsafe. Between 1944 and 1946, Ruth was sent to mental institutions 3 times. That left Gloria, just a child, to take care of everything. Buy groceries, pay bills, bathe her mother, and still try to make it to school, often showing up late. Those years taught her something deep, that money and dependence could trap women in ways that no one talked about. She remembered stealing small coins from milk bottles just so her mother wouldn't have to beg her father by telegram. Even when Gloria was a teenager, nothing felt stable. The house was falling apart, her mother still wasn't well, and they had barely enough to get by. In 1950, when she was 16, a church next door bought their broken-down home. That opened a small window. Gloria could now live with her older sister in Washington, D.C., and finish high school there. She started at Waite High in Toledo and later moved to Western High School in D.C., where she juggled babysitting jobs and cashier work just to afford food and bus fare. Even with everything going on, she made the honor roll and graduated in June 1952. She used to hide her report cards so her mother wouldn't get confused and panic. She was already learning how to survive quietly and keep moving forward. That fall, she got a full scholarship to Smith College, one of the top women's schools. Gloria chose to study government, and she was one of only 43 students in her major. In 1953, right as Senator Joseph McCarthy was accusing people of being communists on live TV, Gloria helped organize a mock trial on campus to make fun of those hearings. She and her classmates held up blank cards as a joke about McCarthy's empty accusations. 700 people showed up, and newspapers wrote about it. Some professors warned her it might hurt her future job chances, but Gloria didn't care. She said fear should be mocked, not obeyed. She still kept a 3.8 GPA and graduated with honors in 1956. In 1957, just before heading to India on a research trip, something happened that changed everything. Gloria got pregnant. Abortion was illegal in the United States and in Britain. But in London, a doctor named John Sharp agreed to help her. He asked only that she keep his name secret, and promised to live her life the way she truly wanted. The risk was huge. If caught, he could have faced 5 years in prison. Gloria never forgot his kindness. She said if he hadn't helped her, she might never have become a writer or activist. She didn't speak about it publicly until 1971, but that experience became one of the reasons she fought for women's rights. From 1957 to 1959, Gloria traveled all across India. She was researching village women and their roles in society. She lived on just 4 rupees a day, slept in simple ashrams, and walked thousands of kilometers with people in the land gift movement. She met women from lower castes who worked hard all day for just a few handfuls of rice, yet still gave land to those who had none. Seeing this shaped the way she thought about women, class, and power. She wrote in her notes that real change didn't come from big government buildings, but from village wells where women gathered water. Years later, she said she saw the roots of intersectionality in those villages, long before anyone used that word. She returned to the U.S. in early 1956 and graduated magna cum laude. Smith awarded her a prestigious Harvard fellowship worth $2,400, but her mother's health had worsened again. Gloria chose not to go to Harvard. Instead, she moved to New York City and visited her mother in Toledo each month, helping with hospital bills and paperwork. She also began pitching articles. Her first paid piece was about fancy kitchen gadgets and paid $100, just enough to fix her mother's roof. That choice, she said later, showed her what feminism really meant. It wasn't just about politics, it was about family, too. In October 1957, Gloria arrived in Manhattan with almost nothing. She had long bus ride receipts, a notebook full of ideas, and barely any cash. She waited tables at a diner for 80 cents an hour and made tips that rarely went past $5 a night. Her room at the International House cost $12 a week, and every dollar mattered. Her first article that got published was about how birth control cost different prices for different women. It paid only $50, but it was a start. She often said her true education came from balancing trays and rejection slips. Then she returned to India from 1958 to 1960 with another student fellowship. This time she traveled over 11,000 kilometers, slept in train stations, and interviewed poor women across the country. She saw Dalit women earning only 25 pies for carrying heavy bricks. In one village in Tamil Nadu, she saw 2 council seats reserved for women, something unheard of in those days. She wrote reports and mailed them to newspapers under a fake name, and those stories slowly began to open eyes. But in the early 1960s, her past would stir up controversy. From 1960 to 1962, Gloria helped run a youth group that sent students to anti-Soviet festivals. Later, it was revealed the group had received secret funding from the CIA. In 1967, a magazine uncovered the whole scheme. Gloria admitted she knew where the money came from, but said the agency had been liberal and honorable. The news shocked people. How could a future feminist icon be tied to something like that? But it also showed that Gloria had always operated in powerful, complicated spaces. In September 1962, she finally got a big break. Her article, The Moral Disarmament of Betty Coed, ran in Esquire. It showed that most women feared their careers would ruin their chances at marriage. Gloria backed it up with surveys and hard data, even charting how birth control use was rising fast. Some readers were angry. One anonymous letter came with a pink rosary and a threat. But the article hit hard and made her name known. In 1963, she did something even bolder. Gloria went undercover as a Playboy bunny. For 17 days, she worked at the New York Playboy Club under a fake name. Her job paid just $1 an hour, and after costume fees, she made barely $18 a week for 54 hours of work. The rules were strict. She was inspected before each shift. She had to wear a corset and perform the bunny dip just right. Customers were allowed to touch, as long as they tipped. Gloria took notes, hid them in her sleeves, and turned the experience into a shocking two-part exposé. The article caused a media storm and led to major changes at the club, but it also hurt her career. Many editors saw her as just a pretty face who played dress-up for stories. In March 1969, Gloria Steinem walked into a church basement in New York City with just a notebook in hand. She came to report on a small gathering, not to join it. But what she heard that day would change her life forever. One by one, 12 women stood up and shared painful, terrifying stories about their illegal abortions. Some had been blindfolded and taken to strange apartments. One woman paid $1,500 to a man in Brooklyn, only to bleed for days. These women were protesting the fact that the state was making abortion laws without even asking a single woman for her opinion. Gloria sat in the back, listening, and something shifted deep inside her. She later called it her big click. At 35 years old, she stood up and shared her own story about getting an abortion back in 1957 in London. It had been a secret for years, but that day she said it out loud. And from that moment, she wasn't just a reporter anymore. She became an activist. She later said it felt like she had crossed a border and burned the bridge behind her. Just 4 weeks later, on April 7, 1969, New York Magazine published her powerful essay titled "After Black Power, Women's Liberation." In it, she compared racism and sexism directly. She pointed out that women earned only 59 cents for every dollar a man made, and only 2% of all managers were women. The phones at the magazine rang non-stop. Hundreds of women called asking how they could join the movement. Some advertisers were so angry they threatened to pull their ads. But her words had already spread. The article was reprinted in 42 college newspapers by June. Steinem had become a voice people were finally hearing. Some loved her, some mocked her. But no one could ignore her anymore. On July 17, 1971, she helped start something real and practical. She and 2 other women founded the Women's Action Alliance in Manhattan with a small $20,000 grant. Their office was tiny, just 1 room, but letters poured in from women across the country. They wanted help fighting workplace discrimination. They needed resources for raising kids in ways that didn't reinforce old gender roles. Steinem led the board from 1971 to 1978 and made sure the group focused on action, not just talk. By 1975, they had shipped out 50,000 copies of their childhood development guide. It helped schools stop using books that only showed mothers cooking and cleaning. They also launched the first ever battered women's hotline in the U.S. in January 1973. At first, the calls were answered through a borrowed telephone switchboard. They didn't have much, but they kept going. Between September 1969 and August 1970, Steinem spoke at 38 rallies. She traveled constantly, showing up at Capitol buildings, city parks, and college campuses. She spoke once every 10 days on average. At a rally in Central Park in November 1969, she held up job listings from that very morning. One said a man would earn up to $160 a week. Another said a woman would get just $90 for the same job. The crowd gasped. When hecklers told her to go home and cook, she smiled and said she only cooked up revolutions. Slowly, the media began to change their tone. A BBC reporter called her persuasive, not angry. People started to see feminists in a new light. Then came something no one expected. On December 20th, 1971, a special preview edition of Ms. Magazine came out. It was meant to be a one-time insert inside New York Magazine. But within 8 days, It sold 300,000 copies. It shocked the mostly male publishing world. Steinem said it proved there was a huge audience for women's voices that no one had ever bothered to count. More than 26,000 people sent in checks to subscribe before a single full issue even existed. The success gave them enough money to say no to advertisers that didn't align with their message. In January 1972, Ms. released its first standalone issue. It was bold, fiery, and unapologetic. It had stories about welfare, lesbian motherhood, and removing sexist words like chairman. Retailers in 7 states refused to sell it, but it still sold 350,000 copies, more than Esquire that month. Steinem made sure only women were in charge of editing and publishing. She said women's stories should never have to wait for a man's permission again. In the spring of 1972, just months before the Roe v. Wade case, Ms. printed a full-page message signed by 53 famous women. They all said they had abortions, even though it was still illegal in many states. Steinem knew it could land her in jail, but she did it anyway. The magazine included a coupon so other women could sign too. More than 10,000 people mailed theirs in. The pressure grew until the Supreme Court finally legalized abortion on January 22, 1973. The cover of that first issue showed something else that made waves. It was Wonder Woman, with the headline, "Wonder Woman for President." Steinem had found out that the comic character had been stripped of her powers by male editors. That cover helped change that. Thousands of letters flooded DC Comics, and by January 1973, Wonder Woman got her powers back. Some advertisers thought comics weren't serious enough for a real magazine, but Ms. gained more subscribers than ever. That cover made Wonder Woman a feminist symbol. By 1975, Ms. was being sold in 22 countries. That July, it published an 8-page investigation into female genital mutilation, a practice affecting nearly 100 million girls. It was the first time a major American magazine dared to call it violence, not culture. Some ambassadors were furious, but readers voted it the most important story of the year. Donations from readers helped fund a World Health Organization group on the issue in 1977. Between 1973 and 1976, Ms. refused to run ads for cigarettes and diet pills. They also limited beauty content and rejected sexist ads. This cost the magazine about $2 million. Revlon pulled its ads after the magazine featured a Soviet feminist without makeup on the cover in 1980. To keep the magazine alive, they raised subscription prices and held benefit concerts. Steinem said they would never let ad money decide what they could or couldn't say. In July 1971, Steinem helped launch the National Women's Political Caucus. Alongside Bella Abzug, Shirley Chisholm, and Betty Friedan, she gathered 324 women from 27 states. They wrote a plan demanding that half of all political delegates in 1972 be women, and they made it happen. Women at the Democratic Convention jumped from 13% in 1968 to 40% in 1972. By 1980, over 220 women trained by the caucus had been elected to office. In November 1977, Steinem helped organize the National Women's Conference in Houston. It lasted 4 days and brought together 2,000 delegates from every state. They debated 26 issues and created a 20,000-word plan that called for the Equal Rights Amendment to be passed. Outside the event, 15,000 protesters led by Phyllis Schlafly rallied against them. Steinem said the women inside were more representative than most legislatures. The conference had a $5 million budget and was aired live on C-SPAN. It became the Carter administration's guidebook on women's policy. In October 1983, Steinem released her book Outrageous Acts and Everyday Rebellions. It sold 100,000 copies in the first month. One essay described her undercover work as a Playboy bunny. revealing the low pay and invasive medical exams. Another compared Nazi laws about women to modern abortion restrictions. Critics were furious. Some libraries banned the book, and the magazine's phones lit up with angry calls. But the book became a bestseller and brought her ideas to a new generation. In 1986, she joined the Women's Encampment for a Future of Peace near a missile base in New York. For 6 weeks, 12,000 women from 12 countries camped there, protesting nuclear weapons. Steinem gave the opening speech, calling nukes the ultimate form of male violence. Over 650 women were arrested, including 2 politicians from Denmark. Their actions forced the U.S. government to answer tough questions at international meetings. The protests helped lay the groundwork for future treaties. That same decade, Steinem became a key witness in Congress about pornography. In November 1983, she spoke at a Senate hearing explaining how porn fueled real-world violence. Her words influenced the Meese Report in 1984 and helped shape a 1986 bill, though it didn't pass. Even so, her efforts changed how lawmakers talked about sexual exploitation. And in 2013, President Barack Obama gave her the Presidential Medal of Freedom. He said she had turned outrage into action. That medal honored everything she had done, even the work that didn't always make headlines. For many years, Gloria Steinem was known for saying, "A woman needs a man like a fish needs a bicycle." That's why people were shocked when she got married at age 66. On September 3, 2000, she married David Bale, a South African-born businessman who was also Christian Bale's father. The ceremony took place at the home of Cherokee Chief Wilma Mankiller in Oklahoma. Instead of saying husband and wife, they chose to call each other partners. They had separate homes in New York and Los Angeles and never mixed their finances. Gloria didn't change her last name. Just a little over 3 years later, on December 30, 2003, David Bale passed away from brain lymphoma. Gloria later called their marriage the happiest political act of my life. Many couldn't believe she had married at all, but it showed what she had always believed, that it's not your age that shapes your life, but the choices you make. In 2015, Gloria shared something she had kept private for over 80 years. In her memoir, My Life on the Road, she revealed that when she was around 9 years old, she had been sexually touched by people who were supposed to be family friends. At that time, she lived on the road with her father, who was an antique dealer. She said the experience made her realize how silent and hidden violence could be. Even though she had spent decades fighting for women's safety, she had never spoken publicly about her own pain until then. She also explained that this was why she kept lights on while sleeping, even as an adult, because it was in the dark that she felt most afraid. Her words helped people understand that the fights she led weren't just political, they were deeply personal. What she had lived through as a child gave her strength to push for change, even when it hurt to remember. In the 1980s, Gloria began a quiet relationship that lasted 10 years. She fell in love with Franklin A. Thomas, who was the first black man to lead the Ford Foundation. They met while working on civil rights projects and kept their own homes, hers in Manhattan, his in Brooklyn. They never married. She had also dated Olympian Rafer Johnson and filmmaker Mike Nichols. Later in the 1990s, her relationship with media mogul Mort Zuckerman became public after she called it a time of gold-plated loneliness. Through all of it, Gloria never gave up traveling. She spent most of the year on the road, working for the causes she believed in. Franklin's children even gave her a nickname, Glow, and accepted her place in their father's life. At a time when many expected women to settle down, Gloria's life showed that love didn't have to follow old rules. Her relationships were proof that closeness doesn't have to mean giving up your freedom. At age 52, In 1986, Gloria found a lump in her breast. It turned out to be cancer. She chose to have a lumpectomy, followed by 6 weeks of radiation, which was still a new kind of treatment back then. She spoke openly about the pain, the tiredness, and how her hair thinned out. Most activists were seen as strong and fearless, but she wanted people to know that even leaders get sick, and that it's okay to talk about it. She began speaking at medical conferences and helped push for a law that expanded free cancer screenings for poor women. It became law in 1990. She also made sure Ms. Magazine published real stories from women who had gone through treatment. Gloria's illness didn't stop her. It became part of her message. She later said that going through cancer helped her realize she needed to take care of herself, too. That lesson, she said, saved both her health and her ability to keep fighting. In 1992, Gloria released a book called Revolution from Within. It was almost 600 pages long, and when it hit stores in January, the first 150,000 copies sold out in just one day. It stayed at #1 on the New York Times bestseller list for 9 weeks. By the end of that year, over 1 million copies had been sold. In the book, Gloria argued that political change wouldn't last unless women believed they were worthy of it inside themselves. Some people mocked the book. Others praised it. Some colleges added it to psychology reading lists, while others treated it like feminist theory. Even though critics argued about it, publishers saw how successful it was and started looking for more books that talked about healing and politics together. Gloria's book didn't just sell, it changed the way people thought about feminism and self-worth. In 1993, a TV movie based on Gloria's famous Playboy exposé aired on HBO. It was called A Bunny's Tale, based on the undercover job she did in 1963 as a Playboy bunny. The film starred Kirstie Alley and drew over 3 million viewers when it aired on February 29th. The bunny costumes were recreated exactly like they had been in the 60s, and the script used Gloria's real notes. After it aired, Playboy said club membership cancellations jumped 12%. More importantly, a government agency used the film as evidence in a case about sexual harassment at work. For young people who didn't read the old article, the movie opened their eyes. HBO even aired it every Easter weekend, which made people laugh, but also kept the story alive. Gloria proved that even entertainment could become part of the fight for change. In 2015, Gloria finally spoke openly about something people had whispered about for decades. Back in the late 1950s, she had led a group called the Independent Research Service. It turned out the group had been funded by the CIA. From 1958 to 1962, the CIA paid for student travel that helped fight Soviet influence. Gloria said the agency only paid travel costs and never told her what to say or write. She shared this in her memoir, My Life on the Road, and even quoted old CIA memos that called her useful because she could win people over without needing a weapon. When the book came out, the story exploded online. People argued whether she had been tricked or whether she had used the system for good. Book sales jumped, and suddenly, people saw her as not just a local activist, but a global one. The truth was complicated, but she didn't run from it. On October 17, 2005, Gloria joined with Jane Fonda and Robin Morgan to launch the Women's Media Center in New York. Their goal was clear: to make women more visible and powerful in the media. They started with $3 million in funding and created a database called SheSource, which listed expert women who could speak on the news. In their first big study, they found that only 22% of front-page stories were written by women. By 2015, that number had climbed to 38%. Gloria also pushed for campaigns that made networks apologize for sexist stories. Between 2010 and 2014, CNN had to say sorry 5 times on live TV. The Women's Media Center also trained over 12,000 women to speak out and even launched a global project about sexual violence in war zones. For Gloria, this group became a way to turn activism into long-term results. In 2018, filmmaker Julie Taymor started working on The Glorias, a movie about Steinem's life. Gloria agreed to help, but only to correct facts, not the creative parts. Over 2 years, she gave feedback on 147 small details, from bus seat colors to real campaign buttons. The movie premiered at the Sundance Film Festival on January 26, 2020, just hours before the news of Kobe Bryant's tragic death. Still, it got a 77% score on Rotten Tomatoes and reached viewers in over 200 countries through Amazon. Gloria said her favorite scene was when Alicia Vikander recreated the 1970 Women's Strike for Equality March, with 300 extras matching the real crowd size. Even though COVID ruined the theater release, the film reached over 1.8 million households in its first month online. It gave her story a new audience, young people around the world who now saw how far she had come. On April 12, 2025, Gloria, now 91, gave the closing speech at the Jubilee Conference in New York. Over 200 people came to hear her speak: chefs, writers, and young activists. She talked about feminism as the longest revolution and said it must now include climate justice too. She pointed out that women make up 80% of climate refugees, but hold just 15% of leadership roles in environmental decisions. At one point she said, "Dance more. Joy is the most subversive act." And the whole crowd cheered. After her talk, Padma Lakshmi gave her a special timeline, showing all the victories from Ms. Magazine's birth in 1972 to now. Gloria held it up and said, "History isn't a straight line. It's a spiral we climb together." Her talk was streamed live and watched over 600,000 times in 2 days. Her message still moves people, no matter their age. After Roe v. Wade was overturned on June 24, 2022, Gloria turned her Instagram and X accounts into tools for activism. Even though she mostly stays home in Manhattan, her voice reached millions. Her pinned video after the ruling hit 4.6 million views in just 3 days. She explained what people could do next: support abortion funds, push for state laws, and demand changes to the courts. She posted hotline numbers hidden behind emojis to avoid censorship. In May 2024, she shared a thread showing how pregnancy-related deaths had gone up by 14% in states that banned abortion. She added, "This is not theoretical, it's lethal." Her online following now reaches 2.1 million people, more than Ms. Magazine ever did. Even without leaving home, she's still pushing the movement forward, turning likes and shares into real-world action. In April 2025, Gloria did an emotional interview where she shared something that still haunts her. Back in the 1960s, she stayed quiet about the sexual harassment she faced, even though she was already a rising journalist. She told how one well-known writer pinned her and tried to kiss her, and she had to bite his cheek to escape. She didn't speak out then because she feared it would end her career. Even more painfully, she admitted that famous newsmen offered her jobs in exchange for private meetings. She never named them but said they later got exposed in the 1990s. By telling the story now, she showed that even powerful women sometimes feel scared and silent. But she also showed that it's never too late to speak up.